Rahul, thanks so much for joining me today on the GT Impact podcast.
Hey, Justin, nice to be here. How are you?
I'm doing well. I think you and I met, I guess, a couple months ago now at the Product Marketing Summit here in San Francisco. And I heard that you ran an awesome session as part of the Product Marketing Leadership Summit. Since then, following you on LinkedIn, you were kind enough to give us some really, really awesome, really valuable feedback on Asset Mule, on our product that we're building for product marketers, and your experience working at smaller sort of organizations, earlier stage organizations, as well as large companies, was just so valuable that I felt, we had to get you on the podcast. We had to get this knowledge out there in the product marketing community. So really appreciate you taking the time out of your busy day to join us here.
Oh, happy to do it. We are. It's all about the community. So
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, for those that aren't familiar with you, maybe you can give us a quick sort of background, who you are, how you got into product marketing, and sort of what do you specialize when it comes to product marketing? What's your niche? I think product marketers come from so many different backgrounds and have so many different areas of expertise. Maybe you can share a little bit of that to our audience here.
Yeah, absolutely. You hit the nail on the head. Product marketing is, I think it's a discipline that draws you. Most people I know sort of fell into product marketing. Very few, maybe the last decade or so. There's much more, like the PMM summit, your show, go to market. More availability online has made it more of a discipline. But in the B2B SaaS world, people are sort of just drawn into it or fall into it. You came from sales. My career is just three chapters. I did engineering, and then I did product, and then I fell into product marketing. I couldn't be happier. It's not for the faint of heart. And I think, as you know, you have many bosses. Things are not clear, but that's what I like about it. I think it's an intersectional role. And intersectional roles very often have the power, behind the scenes power, to drive the company forward, drive any initiative forward. So yeah.
Yeah, that's super spot on the way I think about it too. And what I love about it is, I've always wanted to be a founder, and I felt like product marketing was the closest to being a founder that I found before being a founder, because it is kind of like a blank slate, and you kind of have to figure things out for yourself and kind of mold your role, yourself,
Absolutely.
right? So I totally agree with you on that front. And one thing that you mentioned, I've seen you talk about it on LinkedIn, is, product marketing can have various shapes. I loved how you use that phrase. I've been always trying to find the right way to describe it, but you're totally right, is there's various shapes to product marketing, depending on different organizations and backgrounds. And I'm curious, in your sense, what did you mean by that specifically? And what do you think are the factors that really determine the shape of a product marketer within a specific organization?
Yeah. I got to give credit to someone who came up with that. It wasn't me. It was someone in the audience at the PMM summit. And for the life of me, I can't remember. But I took that. This is what's amazing about going to having these conversations, right? Someone said, "Oh, so the shape is different." I'm like, that's what I should have titled my talk, right? Shapes of PMM. And let me tell you, I've been thinking a lot about this. So I'll tell you, I think it is very, people say, put a square in a peg, whatever, right? Let's say there's three shapes of PMM that I see. And I think call one a square, one a circle, one a star. I don't know. And let's have fun with it. So I think a square PMM, let's just say it's very traditional. And that is, where you have a product market fit. I would say you're generally 200 mil plus in revenue, or at least 100 million plus. Your churn is not crazy. You've got repeatability. You've got some salespeople. In that case, in a B2B SaaS world, it's what I would call traditional product marketing. Whereas you're working on the content, you're making sure the campaigns are aligned, the sales enablement, you're playing a part in that. Definitely launches and product strategy. You're setting close with those teams. So that's one sort of, let's say, traditional, a little bit more well established. um, the second thing that I say is, what was the second shape? Circle? Yeah, let's say circle. I think that is in a that I put that second one in a category of, let's say, you're um, not, you're sub 100 million, and you're not past like 500, 600 million in revenue. So that's another. We'll talk about that as the last one, right? I think the circle is probably the most fun, adaptive, and difficult part of PMM, because you really like. I think you as a PMM have to do what the organization needs. If you're sub 100 million, you found some PMF, product market fit. But sometimes you're paying attention to pipe. Sometimes you're paying attention to adoption. That's a product conversation. Sometimes it's really, really get on the revenue. Sometimes it's CSM, right? Or NPS is falling. And the classic, like the CEO wants to help, with every messaging, every launch, or what have you. And all those are completely valid. So I think you end up being in this space where there's a lot of opinions. And the superpower for Circle PMM, I believe, is someone who really drives momentum through those opinions, and has an opinion of themselves, right? You can't do the average summation. Then you get what I think you get is a bad product and a bad marketing and a bad launch. And the final thing I'll say, if you are well above 500 in revenue, you've matured, you're looking at enterprise scale. First, let's see, we're calling that shape a star. Seems a little unfair to call them a star, but let's say you've done the hard work of their star. Then you may find yourself being a PMM, which is far more specialized. For example, I would say a lot of product marketing that happens in companies like Salesforce, Cisco, is very close to sales enablement and launches. It's
Hmm.
fundamentally what they're doing, right? They're not doing a ton of pipe. It's related to pipe, but right, it's not super top of the funnel, because you probably have a department like a corporate marketing department or someone who does that. However, let's say you are at I don't know, Google or an NVIDIA, very engineering driven company. So no matter, or Intel, or take examples, right? Again, huge companies, well mature organizations, PMM might have to do both enterprise enablement, strat accounts, as well as really inform corporate so that the fidelity and the accuracy of what we're saying in the market rings true with different audiences. So I don't know. That's just I'll pause there. That's kind of was my shot at what we talked about, different shapes.
That's interesting for sure. So definitely, it sounds like the company size or stage of the company influences the shape of the product marketing organization or the product marketer. I'm curious, do you think that also a product marketer's background, right? So you mentioned you come from like an engineering product background. I come from more of a sales background. Do you see that influencing it as well? Like, I find myself, for instance, when I first took on a product marketing role in a new company, really leaning into, I'm going to get friendly with the sales team. I'm going to, get those
Yep.
first couple wins. It's where I'm comfortable. It's, I have a little bit of credibility. I used to be a salesperson. Do you
Yep.
find that also influences sort of the shape as well?
Excellent. I mean, you just came up with the new shape, and I think we should we should put that in. What are we missing? A triangle or whatever? You're
Yeah.
spot on, right? And I think there's there's a human psychology behind it. Let's say you came from sales, which you did. You gotta PMM is very much earned respect over time, right? So the wins that you get, the trust that you build in 100 little moments and 50 small deals and 3 big deals, that's where it comes in, because then people will sort of say, "Hey, get that guy in the deal," depending, or get that gal in the deal, whatever stage of the deal is. Let's bring them in. I would say that that definitely applied to me. I had sales engineering was always my best friend, because I feel that they always knew what was actually going on in a deal, and so yeah, lots of different factors. And then, given that I came from a product background, I leaned heavily, to your point, with product teams. right? So they
Mm.
were and I knew the shortcomings, right? Because product was just like, get that out, get that feature out. And I'm like, I mean, I don't know how to tell you, but the sales team is really having a hard time selling this. I mean, you think it's hot and sexy may or may not sell. Uh, so depending on what the conversation is. So I would say leaning into that core strength, but also understanding that what is the opposite of your core strength. So in my case, it was I became very, very good friends with salespeople because I had not carried a quota, and I felt that so much to teach me.
Yeah, I also I felt that as well in my last company. So I've done both B2B product marketing, and then the last company I was at was B2C, right? So there actually wasn't any sales team.
Mm,
It was marketing to consumers, right?
yep.
And I was very close to the product team, and man, did I learn so much about product development and launching and running beta programs, and it actually really did energize me in my work because it was new, right? It was a little uncomfortable at first, but man, you know, I started getting really excited just about all the different things that I was learning and the new experiences that I was having. And as a product marketer, I think it really rounded me out. So I can definitely resonate with your experience on the other side, sort of trying to lean into sales and become sort of friendly with the sales team. One question I had, so you were talking about different sizes of organizations and like different shapes of product marketers. One thing that's interesting about you, I think, is that you've been at the 3-person product marketing team sort of size,
Yep.
and then at the 30 product marketing team
Yep.
size. And I'm curious how the role of product marketing sort of evolves through that. And you've kind of talked a little bit about that, but maybe even more so the leadership, like product marketing leadership. What are you
Yeah.
doing in the early stages versus what does a product marketing leader's role look like at the later stages when you have a big team underneath you?
Yeah. Great question. Um, I think the I would say regardless of the team size, there's this term that gets thrown in the industry called first team. You
Mm,
may or may not have heard of that, and I do think it's true. Your first team, if when you're leading a group of people, is not necessarily the group you're leading, is your peers, because really that becomes the stakeholder conversation and how you move the organization forward. Now, and the reason I say that is think about it if you're a CEO. If you're the founder CEO of a 10-person company, 15-person company, or you've grown to 50,000 or whatever, you kind of looking at what is this org slash leader delivering for me? I mean, you just kind of have to look at that. You could get very metric based, dollar in ROI per employee, or you could just say, there's an abstract value to it. Um, so the reason I bring that up is it changes, but for teams of smaller people, it is, in my experience, whether it was Rapid or a couple of startups, uh, way more hands-on, less process, get stuff out of the door fast, respond super quickly. Um, you can actually be far more agile, but just because you have less processes perhaps to follow. Um, and I think you have to wear a lot of different hats. Um, Whereas I think in a, let's say, 30-person team, what gets rewarded or what gets perhaps valued more is a little bit more depth. So for example, let's say I have a 30-person team, and I did, right? And I had to, at some point, as I was orging the team and structuring the team, I was like, you know what? I kind of need to pull a couple of people and just have them focus on mid market. The product was not that dramatically different, but the needs and the way the mid market talks about it and what they care about just are so dramatically different. The sales cycle is different. And the enterprise folks either don't care about that or they're not incented to care about that. So I think it's a little bit of a North Star. And I don't think of there's a way to organize the PMM org. It is ultimately a service function. And I think clarity on service of what, that's what the leader needs to really articulate very clearly with their peers, with the CMO or CPO or CRO. I've reported all three of them. It changes depending on where you're at. Um, but clarity on what do you expect to deliver almost on a quarterly basis. And then let's work backwards from that, what the org needs to be. Um, yeah.
That's super interesting. You touched on another thing that actually I was curious to get your thoughts on. I've been asked this. Do you prefer when product marketing sits under product, or do you prefer when it sits under marketing or the CRO? I'm curious if you have a take on this. Like, I struggle with it a little bit because I've been on the marketing side, and I thought, oh, I feel like this is a good place to sit. I can be closer to sales and so on. But then I also was a product marketer in the product organization in another job,
Yep.
and I actually really liked it because I was pulled in early.
Mhm.
Like I felt like when I was on the marketing side, it was like, hey, we need to launch this thing. Product would come to us and they'd be like, we need to launch this thing. It's already developed and all this stuff. And then suddenly now that I'm in the product org, I'm actually there when they're talking about you know what feature we should build next, and
Mhm.
what are the problems that customers are facing, and how do we prioritize. So I struggle with that a little bit because I think there
Yep.
are benefits on both sides, but I wonder what your thoughts are.
Yeah, they are spot on. I think, they are, so I'll go ahead and say something maybe a little controversial. So let's just have fun. Again, I think if you're sub 100 million, there is no sort of the answer is adapt. This season or this year, we need you be closer to product. This season, we really need to scale revenue, be closer to sales. We're super PLG. We'll have you part of growth. Doesn't matter, right? It can be part of a growth team. I do think if you're 200 mil plus in revenue and you're constantly having this sort of like, oh my God, I don't know where PMM should sit. I'm sorry, Mr. CEO, you're not doing your job and
Mm,
you lack clarity. And the reason I say that is that it's a go-to-market. The product marketers are function. I've had these conversations. PMM as a function should just be deleted and call it go-to-market function. Or
mm,
whatever you call the name as, right? It doesn't matter because it's not a. It's ultimately it's a chief business officer close slash chief CEO function, and a CEO or a CMO who doesn't have clarity on what the go to market should be and can implement it down the line, which you kind of need to if you're 200 million plus, you're running an organization of a certain size, you need to scale. You need to figure out how to do that. I'm not saying it's easy, by the way. Like, who am I to say that? I think it's incredibly hard. But I think I would say sub 200 million changes constant, plus 200 million, if you are noticing that there isn't a clear opinion on why PMM should be with product, the answer should be it's with products because of X, because our go to
yeah.
market strategy is X. Oh, it's with marketing because our go to market strategy is X. And I think normally you'll notice with very large companies with large portfolios, it usually sits with marketing. And the reason for that is you're talking about scale. You don't want to look like you have 15 different messages. You don't want to look like your churn is important, right? Churn is super important. You can keep adding people to the top of the funnel. If you've got a leaky bucket, you're going to work twice as hard. So for those reasons, if you have a massive portfolio of products, like Salesforce did, Cisco did, many others do, it kind of really does make sense to be under a centralized marketing function. But at the end of the day, it's all these services. I mean, I would just say, end of the day, what are we trying to do? Let's have clarity and work backwards from a go-to-market goal, a revenue goal, what have you, and then let's design these organizations in service of them. So people feel like they're part of a goal and they're part of a target versus feeling, oh, I'm PMM, so I should be doing this. Put me in this
Mm.
org, and these are my swim lanes. I'm sorry, like if you're a founder, do you care? You want to see results, right? Right? I don't know.
Totally, totally. And you kind of touched on this as well. But when you think about structuring a product marketing team at a larger company, it sounds like there's no one way to structure it. I think you mentioned, right? It's really dependent on what you're trying to achieve. But I'm curious the various different ways you've seen uh, larger product marketing teams be structured, right? I think,
Mhm.
the obvious one is maybe by product or by
Yep.
ICP, right? But what are some of the other ways to slice and dice the team that you've seen
Yep.
that have been quite effective?
The super common one is, like you said, by product or portfolio of products. So affinity to a couple of products will have a PMM tackle 1 to 4, sometimes 9 products. they're all in the same sort of basket, if you will. I have not seen a lot of. I've done it once or twice by mid SMB, mid market, and enterprise because the needs were so different. So we gave
Yeah.
a couple of people who were. That has its pros and cons because if the SMB product line is very wide, you're gonna have to sacrifice depth of knowledge of the product for that PMM. Um, I have seen organizations, and I've played with this a little bit, is if there's a strong PLG function in the company, what does it mean to have PMMs, maybe not, but dedicate some of their time to really the PLG function? Because it
Yeah.
demands different things and it's very growth oriented, it's very numbers, it's very metrics, it's looking at all the product usage data, which doesn't really translate to us telling your salespeople that. Like it doesn't really, you can't tell them, let me give you your amplitude data of this market segment. What am I supposed to do with it? Um, so that is another possibility that we've played around with is not, having the same person sort of do 30% this, 80%, 70% this. It's a little bit more taxing on the BMM, I would say, that PLG plus SLG. What else? Those are the common ones. I mean, product is usually, many ways because you have to sit close to the product and your time is limited in 24 hours. It tends being very, how close you are to being able to explain and understand the product.
Yeah, makes total sense. I think that PLG SLG one is quite interesting actually, because I think a lot of companies are now having both motions in parallel,
Yep.
and having a product marketer that specializes in that PLG side of things makes a lot of sense. And then obviously, traditionally, a product marketer that focuses more on the SLG side as well, and those being maybe two different roles, is really, really interesting. One other thing about your background that caught my attention is not only have you been a product marketer at smaller and larger organizations, but it seems like you've been really focused on the tech audience or the dev audience, right?
Yep.
And I know you come from an engineering product background, so that makes a lot of sense now to me.
Yes.
But I think that audience is notorious for not being very receptive to marketing and sales, right?
Yes.
So I really, I've been in a fortunate position, or maybe I don't know if it's fortunate, but I've always marketed to marketers and to salespeople, right? So these are the type of people that, in some ways, it's easier because they know what you're trying to do and they kind of lay out the information for you, and
Yep.
and so on. In other ways, they also know your tricks, and but we know about the dev community that they're really allergic in a way
Hmm.
to any sort of marketing or sales. So I'm curious to get your perspective on that audience, and you know yeah, tell us a little bit about, how do you market to that audience? What are some strategies or tactics that you've seen be really effective? Like, how do you market differently to that audience versus, say, a more sales or marketing audience that is more receptive, or, you know, um, where marketing and sales is more natural to them, right? It's just something that they're
Yep.
comfortable with.
Yeah. Great question. I'll start off by saying this, and I learned this the hard way, whatever, long way, right? Because I was an engineer. I was one of those people. Are like, oh God, here's another, here's another marketing BS, really. And come on, we've heard these terms like marketing BS or fluff or whatever you want to call it. Um, I would say, let's step back. What is marketing? Marketing is the art of changing someone's mind. And you can't change people's mind until you understand human psychology. And humans are humans. They could be the nerdiest and the most geekiest of humans. They could be the most artistic. Not that those two things are, by any ways mutually exclusive, but I think it goes to the heart of understanding the core psychology. So let's take developers, because I've been marketing to them for a very long time. Um, yeah, there's definitely some things. And I think saying that they're hard to market to sounds is maybe true if you don't understand their psychology, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
walk in the shoes of the, feel the pain type of thing. And it can be hard, but there's a ton of research out there. You talk to the communities. So for example, credibility and fidelity matter a lot to a developer, because the end of the thing is, what are you marketing? If you're marketing a product, a developer can, not all developers, but there's a high chance that a developer could probably build your product or parts of your product, or they want to experience the product immediately. The whole talk to sales is like, why would I talk to anyone? It's like some of that too, like the button of talk to someone. No, I'm not talking to anyone. I'm going to Blind. I'm going to Reddit. I'm going to Stack Overflow. I'm going now to ChatGPT and Perplexity, and I can find out everything there is to find out. So I think it's a little bit of your marketing to builders and makers who very naturally enjoy building, enjoy decomposing things. They're the people who probably took, the toy apart or the computer apart. I used to do that, right? And made probably drove their mom and dad crazy. Like, what are you doing? Like, we're not supposed to take this thing apart, but they're curious in how it works. So that's one aspect. The second aspect, I'll give you the counterpoint of that. They're very much human. And I think this ignoring that they don't enjoy humor, or they can't get silly, or they won't, find X funny, or what, I call total BS on that. I think they're human beings, and you got to understand it's the context of the jokes you're making. It's the context of the, things that are perhaps funny or playful. But I think that it's typically the marriage of those two things, and a well-woven sort of point of view and opinion that makes it fun. And it's hard to do. I think Atlassian does a good job. I think Slack did a phenomenal job. I'll tell you the story. The person at Slack, when I was at Pivotal Software, the lady, I forgot her name, Slack was just taken off. Very few people knew about it. In the engineering community, we kind of knew about it because people would use Slack. And she was the chief designer, or the chief person responsible for the emojis. And there was this huge debate that you can't have all these emojis in the engineering community. Like, it's silly. People think it's ridiculous. They don't take it seriously. Like, and if you're a command line text person, we use our, colon, parenthesis, or what have you. And here you have these range of emotions. And mind you, the iPhone's also taken off around that time. The emojis are coming on. And I love what she said. And she stood her ground. She said, no, the emotions are an important part of understanding software development and how people code and what state of mind they're in, what's frustrating, what's annoying. What's frustrating and annoying are two different things, two different emotions. Happiness and delight are two different emotions. So she was great, and she talked us through that. And Slack was, I would say, largely the first application in the engineering world, if you say, that was just common mainstream and made use of emojis in the engineering community just default, like okay to be, and I'm sure it gets overdone and where things are now. But that's another example, right? Just saying that, no, they're only going to prefer what's, not the actual picture, but only the computer code for it or the text form for it.
Super interesting. Well, this has been a fascinating discussion, exploring areas of product marketing that I'm not super familiar with, learning tons of new things, whether it be in bigger organizations, in the dev focused community. So really appreciate you coming on, sharing your knowledge with us. For folks that are listening in that want to follow you and learn more from you, what's the best place that they can find you?
Oh, LinkedIn. LinkedIn has become absolutely. Yeah, hit me up on LinkedIn. Happy to chat anytime. I do a ton of advising on startups, do private consulting. Yeah, even just happy to talk about it because it's an evolving field. And I love the work you're doing, Justin. Asset Mule, with so many other startups. You're taking, I love the name you have as well, right? Because as PMMs, like, I always believe, right, the perspiration part can be automated. And that's what you're doing in many ways, and so I think it's great. Like, that needs to happen, so it frees time for just a different order of work.
Well, I appreciate that. And going back to your comments on developers, I actually have to give credit to the name to our tech co-founder. He actually,
nice.
As soon as we sort of landed on the concept, he was out there, of course, looking at different domains that are available and so on. And he came up with, again, to your point about, creativity, but also humor. He came up with a couple of funny ones. I think there was a fancy pants in there somewhere. Didn't really align with what we were doing, but and then Asset Mule just kind of hit the nail on the head, and he's gone to town with our mule mascot and all that stuff. So a lot of the creativity, a lot of the
Love it.
life that's in the brand actually comes from him. So you're totally spot on with your
Very
comments
cool.
on that front. But thanks again for coming on, and we'll definitely be following you along on LinkedIn.